She was buried alive because of her beauty by her jealous uncle on the night of her wedding. In the mysterious land of Umueke, where evil dares to walk in broad daylight, one man's jealousy buried beauty in the earth. But what rose from that soil? The world has never seen anything like it. She was the pride of her people, until her own uncle, blinded by envy, buried her alive. But that night the heavens wept, thunder roared, and what his eyes saw next shocked the world. Don't move an inch. You have never heard a chilling story before like this one. This is not just a story. This is a warning, a mystery, a miracle, a tale that will chill your bones and shake your soul. Welcome to IDEKA African Folktales, where legends live and justice never dies. Before we begin, hit that like button, drop a comment, and share this chilling tale with someone who needs to hear the truth about what happened to Adaugo. Things are happening in the town of Umueke. Evil walks in the daylight and dwells among men. It is in this Umueke I told you about an evil dead nurse who visited a hospital from a mortuary, looking for newborn babies to bath. In this same Umueke, a beautiful girl, on the eve of her traditional marriage with the prince, was buried alive by her jealous uncle on the night of her wedding. Her only crime was because she was very beautiful and well-behaved. Her only crime was that she was the pride of her father and the whole community. He buried her alive, but what he saw with his eyes, the universe has never witnessed it. She was the pride of her family, the melody of the village. Her beauty was like sunrise after a long night. But one man's jealousy turned her glory into a grave. What happened next? The world could never explain. In the village of Umueke, where palm trees danced with the wind and the sun kissed the earth like an old friend, there lived a girl whose name made even the river whisper. Adaugo, meaning daughter of the eagle. She was given the name at birth because of the kind of beauty she radiated at birth. As she grew, she was not just beautiful. She was wondrously beautiful. The kind of beauty that stopped conversations mid-sentence, that made young men stammer and elders stroke their beards in silent admiration. Her eyes were like wells of honey, her skin like the early morning sun kissing red clay, and her laughter? It echoed like bells in a temple, pure, rare, unforgettable. But it wasn't just her looks. She was well-mannered, the kind of girl who still greeted the elderly on both knees and fetched water for her neighbors without being asked. She helped her mother at the market. She swept the compound before dawn. She sang as she worked and blessed everyone she passed. Her mother, Mama Ada, used to say, "Adaugo, you are not just my daughter. You are my song. When you smile, my heart dances." Even the village age grade composed songs about her beauty and virtue. On moonlit nights, children danced in the village square, clapping their hands to the rhythm of Ada with the golden skin, who walks like the queen of the river. And her father, Papa Ada, a humble but wise man, looked at her with the kind of pride that made other fathers sigh in envy. She was their only child. Their only joy. But happiness, as it is often said in tales like this, attracts both blessings and jealousy. Behind every shining star is a shadow. And behind Adaugo's rising light stood a man whose heart had long turned to ashes. Okafor, her father's elder brother. Okafor was a respected man in the village, tall, proud, and sharp-tongued. But inside he was wounded by bitterness, poisoned by comparison. He had 5 handsome sons from his first wife, but no daughter. And when the midwives confirmed yet another male child, he had flung the calabash of palm wine across the room and screamed, "What kind of curse is this? Why can't I father a beauty like Adaugo?" He eventually drove his wife away in anger, labeling her useless for not giving him a girl. And in her place he married a much younger woman, Mwama, one of his many concubines. She was soft-spoken and heavily pregnant with twins. To the outside world, Okafor smiled and played the role of doting uncle to Adaugo. But in his heart, a storm brewed. Everywhere he went, people whispered about Adaugo. She is even more beautiful than the queen of Ndaikilianwu. Na Nwatamakata MMA. They say her bride price will be higher than 20 cows. And no wonder, her suitor is a prince from Aguilari. These praises were salt on an open wound. It pained and peppered Okafor. He often stared at her with eyes that smiled but hands that clenched. Why should Obinna, my younger brother, have the kind of daughter kings fight for, when all I have are loud, stubborn boys? And so hatred took root. Not hatred for what she had done, but for who she was. The drums had already started sounding from the hilltop shrine. The next Eek market was to be the day Adaugo's traditional marriage would be sealed. Villagers swept their compounds. Palm wine flowed like rivers. Even strangers from far-off communities came just to catch a glimpse of the girl whose name had become a melody. Her suitor, Prince Abadike, was not just royalty. He was a warrior. He was tall and handsome, heir to the throne of Aguilari Kingdom. It was whispered that he had rejected 10 maidens before declaring that only Adaugo is worthy of the lion's throne. That night, Adaugo sat beside her mother, pounding yam with laughter and humming a love song. Her father returned home with a big smile, his raffia bag filled with gifts from well-wishers. It was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. But evil like a thief was waiting at the door. Just after dinner, Uncle Okafor arrived, wearing a broad smile and carrying a walking stick. He greeted everyone with sweet words and jokes. Then, pulling Adaugo aside gently, he said, "Andabim, your father asked me to fetch firewood from the sacred grove for tomorrow's cooking. He said you should follow me quickly before the moon goes down." Adaugo looked confused. Her mother hesitated. She was not comfortable with Okafor's whispers with her daughter. But she was taught to never question elders, especially as it concerned Adaugo's father elder brother. Adaugo did not go back to the kitchen to her mother or told Snyon where she was going. In the sincerity of her heart, she was safe in the hand of her doting Uncle Okafor. So she tied her wrapper tighter, took her lantern and followed him, barefoot, into the forest. She didn't know that each step was leading her closer to betrayal. She didn't know that the firewood was just a lie. That the man walking in front of her had already dug a shallow grave, deep within the grove where no birds sang. She walked in trust. He walked in envy. And the gods watched, silent, but not blind. The path into the forest was narrow and silent. Not even crickets chirped. The air hung heavy, like it knew something terrible was about to happen. Adaugo walked behind her uncle, her lantern flickering softly, casting shadows that danced on the trees. She clutched her wrapper tightly, heart thumping with unease. "Uncle, are we almost there?" "Yes, child. Just a few more steps," he said, voice calm but eyes dark with intent. They reached a small clearing deep inside the sacred grove, a place where villagers feared to walk at night. No one came here unless they sought to make sacrifices, or hide sins. There, hidden beneath palm fronds and disturbed soil, was a shallow grave already dug. Adaugo's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts screamed, but before she could turn, his hand struck her hard across the face. The lantern shattered. "Uncle," she screamed. "Please, what have I done?" He said nothing, only muttered like a madman, "You should not have been born. You should not have been seen." He shoved her down. She fought, scratched, screamed. But the forest swallowed her cries. As the soil covered her, she raised her hands, trembling, pleading. Her last words echoed with pain. "Uncle, what have I done to you? Good. Somebody help me." He pressed the final handfuls of earth. Her hands remained raised above the ground, like a statue of silent sorrow. That night it rained. Not gently, but violently, like the heavens wept for her. But something strange happened. Lightning struck the grove, and the earth began to tremble. Far from the forest, in Okafor's compound, thunder rolled overhead as Mwama, his pregnant wife, screamed into the night. Her labor came early and fierce. Meanwhile, Okafor was not at home. He was in his brother's house trying to pacify him and his wife. Their eyes knew no sleep that night, worried about their daughter's whereabouts. Okafor had lied that after he left Adaugo that night that he sensed the prince. Her suitor visited and she escorted them. Perhaps the sudden heavy downpour didn't let her return. But they knew the prince does not visit at night. The prince would not come without coming to greet them. But they all waited and invoked the morning with their hands crossed. That night there was no sleep and the night became longer. Morning refused to come. In Okafor's house, the midwives rushed in, faces pale with fear. Something was wrong. The air was thick. The candles flickered. "It's not time yet," Mwama cried. "What is happening to me?" Just before the first cock crow, she gave birth to twin girls. But gasps filled the room. Both babies came out alive. They looked so beautiful. Some said, Adaugo has been replicated but this time as a twins, but something was horribly about the new girls. Their tiny arms lifted high as if reaching for something invisible, up as if someone given punishment, and they cried non-stop. The midwives tried to lower their hands, but the babies screamed in agony. Their shoulders nearly dislocated. Their arms would not drop. Their tiny fingers curled, frozen toward the heavens, just like Adaugo's buried arms. The midwives looked at each other, then whispered behind trembling lips. "This is not natural. This is not childbirth. This is a curse." Mwama wept. "What have I brought into this world?" Okafor stormed in, his wrapper soaked from the rain. When he saw the twins, his face turned white. No, it can't be. But it was. Adaugo's spirit had not gone quietly. She had left a sign. Suddenly, Mwama's hands raised up to the sky and refused to come down. The midwives fled. Okafor's compound was now filled with cries, whispers, and shadows. It was around 5 a.m. and many crowd began to form in his compound, those who heard the heart-wrecking cries. Suddenly again, Okafor's sons, one after another, their hands began to raise to the sky and stiff. More cries. Okafor stormed out, heart pounding, his hands shaking with guilt and fear. "I need to think. I need air. I need answers." He ran through the rain to the home of Oleito, one of his concubines who had 3 daughters for him out of wedlock. When he arrived, he met chaos. Oleito was kneeling on the floor, wailing, her wrapper soaked in tears. Her daughters, aged 4, 6, and 8, sat in a line, their arms lifted, trembling, stuck in the air as if saluting an invisible judge. "Papa, help us. Our hands won't come down." He reached out to touch them, and as his hand neared, the girls began to scream louder and louder until he stumbled back, terrified. Oleito cried, "What have you done? What evil have you brought upon us?" The curse was spreading, and it was female children and every child who came from the groins of Okafor who carried the sign. All of them, connected. Word soon reached the village square. Mothers began checking their daughters. Some were fine, others were not. Okafor was really a public cock, a community he-goat. He had almost laid with the half of the women in Umueke. Who would refuse Okafor? He was so handsome that in his youthful days maidens fought over him. So, girls, children and women all over Umueke who had one connection or the other with Okafor began waking up with their arms frozen in the air, tears in their eyes, mouths too small to describe the unseen pain. And Okafor knew why. He didn't need a priest or diviner. "This is Adaugo's doing," he whispered to himself, trembling. "She wasn't buried. She was planted. And now, she is rising." Some youths were sent to Agilari Kingdom very early in the morning of the night Adaugo disappeared, but the prince said he never visited Umueke that night. Search for Adaugo was declared in every clan and rewards for anyone who could give a link to her whereabout. Adaugo's father Obinna was not a man of many words. But the day his daughter disappeared, his voice became a river of sorrow. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every morning, with blistered feet and an aching heart, he would wander the forest, calling out, "Adaugo, Idem, Answer me, please." He tore through brambles with bare hands. His arms were scratched, his clothes soaked in blood and mud. But still he searched. The villagers tried to stop him. "Let the gods handle this," they pleaded. But how does a father stop looking for his only daughter? On the third night, rain fell like a judgment. Thunder roared. Trees swayed as if mourning. Papa Adaugo, drenched and shivering, fell to his knees under an ancient tree in the sacred grove. Something in his heart told him, "She's here." He dropped to the wet ground and whispered through broken sobs, "Adaugo, my daughter, forgive me. I couldn't protect you. I failed you." Lightning split the sky. Then, silence. He dropped dead. He died of heartbreak. The next morning they found him lifeless, curled at the base of the tree, the very place her spirit hovered. A tear dried on his cheek. The nights that followed the disappearance of Adaugo, Okafor could not sleep. His concubines abandoned him and left the cursed children with him. His sons, once proud and strong, now muttered to themselves and clawed at shadows. But it was his dreams that tormented him most. In the darkest hours of the night, Adaugo began to appear. She wore white, her skin glowing like moonlight, her feet untouched by the ground. Behind her stood children singing. Musical note, Adaugo. Adaugo, beauty born of blessing, never meant to be broken. She stood by a river that flowed upward. She stared at him, not in anger but in sorrow. Then she whispered, "They buried me, but they planted justice." He woke up gasping. His bedroom was filled with flies. His farm withered overnight. His name was cursed in secret tones across Umueke. 12 years have come and gone since Adaugo's sudden disappearance and the death of her father out of heartbreak. But Okafor was still alive. In his house, silence reigned. His twin daughters, now grown, still lived with their arms forever raised. They still looked very beautiful, but what is beauty in a standing statue? They would not even feed themselves by themselves. They only sat idle in front of the house at the mercies of houseflies which perched all over their wounded bodies, including their eyes. Okafor's sons had wandered into the forests 12 years ago, and never returned. His name was never spoken again at family meetings because he had stopped attending any out of shame and fear. Why would he? Some men had lost their marriages because of him when they discovered he sneaked into their matrimonial beds with their wives. Okafor was now a chaff. Only a whisper remained. He heard his conscience very loud. He was the one who buried beauty. And the innocent girls, women and men suffered for years in Umueke because of the evil and jealousy of one man. Dear viewers, don't go without hearing another interesting part of Adaugo's story, the part 2, the return of Adaugo. But before that, can you say this prayer with me? May I or my children never suffer for the evil of another person. 12 years had passed since they found Adaugo's grave at the edge of the forest grove. The villagers of Umueke buried her with reverence, marking the spot with ochre stones and planting a ring of sacred udala trees around it. Over time the grove became a shrine, a place where whispers danced on the wind, where seekers left offerings of kola, yam and palm wine. Wind chimes made from cowries and bronze bells hung from low branches, swaying gently, their soft songs carried on the breeze like lullabies for the dead. But one morning the wind changed. It blew not from the east or west, but in twisting circles, bending the trees against the sky. Birds broke their usual patterns and began flying in jagged shapes, spiraling as though confused or summoned. Leaves rustled without wind. A hush fell over the land. In her mud brick hut near the edge of the forest, Mama Ogadi, the priestess of Umueke and custodian of the shrine, woke suddenly from a deep trance. Sweat bathed her brow and her eyes, white as milk from cataracts, widened with alarm. Her voice trembled with something older than fear. "She is no longer only spirit," she whispered to the empty room. "Adaugo walks again." At first the villagers scoffed. They shook their heads and made jokes. Ghosts belonged in tales told by fireside, not in broad daylight. But their laughter died when they saw the footprints. They appeared at dawn, small, bare, and pressed deep into the clay of the shrine's stone steps. Fresh, damp, as though someone had walked there moments ago. A girl child's feet. No rain had fallen. No one had passed. Some said it was a trick. Others began lighting candles. The shrine, once quiet, began to buzz with unease. Then came the seventh day. That morning, as mist clung to the riverbanks and fishermen cast their nets in silence, a young woman appeared by the water. Her wrapper was white, pure, untouched by dust. Her skin shone like fresh honey in the morning sun, and her eyes held storms and stars as if they had seen centuries. As if they remembered everything. She didn't speak. He simply walked barefoot, up the path to Umueke. And the village paused. Children, first curious, followed her with wide eyes and whispered questions. Dogs, usually brash and barking, lowered their heads and whimpered, tails tucked in reverence. The elders, men and women weathered by time, stood to their feet, compelled by something they could not name. She passed the market square, past the shrine, and finally stopped at the broken gate of an old, crumbling compound. Once grand, now faded by rain and neglect. She looked at it as if she had just stepped outside it moments ago. Her voice was quiet but firm, each word holding the weight of stone. This was my father's house. I am Adaugo. I have returned. There was silence. Then gasps. A clay pot dropped and shattered on the ground. Two old women collapsed to their knees, wailing into their wrappers. From inside a nearby hut, a weak cry rose, hoarse and trembling. Adaugo's mother, who had not spoken in years, who lay frail on a mat like brittle leaves in harmattan, pushed herself up. Her feet found strength. She staggered to the doorway and with a sudden burst of life ran toward the voice. "Chiam-o, my daughter. My Adaugo." And she embraced her, body shaking, tears soaking the white cloth. The embrace lasted long, too long, as if trying to fill 12 empty years in one breath. But even in that joy, something unnerved the people. Adaugo looked exactly as she had when she vanished. Not a wrinkle. Not a change. Her skin was untouched by time, her eyes ageless. She hadn't aged a day. Whispers spread like spilled palm oil. By nightfall, the village buzzed with stories. Candles burned in doorways. Drummers played solemn rhythms at the square. Pilgrims began to arrive, drawn from neighboring towns and distant lands. They came barefoot with mats rolled over their shoulders, carrying gourds of wine, offerings, and endless questions. Is she a goddess? A spirit? Or has the earth brought forth its child once more? Adaugo said nothing of her years beneath the soil. She simply sat each night by the udala tree, her voice lifting in soft songs that none had heard before but somehow remembered. Songs that made the leaves shimmer and birds gather. Owls hooted gently. Fireflies lit up the darkness like stars around her. One midnight, as the village watched in hushed awe, an old hunter emerged from the crowd. His name was Nadazi. Once the greatest hunter in 3 villages, he had gone blind 15 years before Adaugo's disappearance. He was led by his grandson to the tree where she sat. Kneeling, he lifted trembling hands. "Touch me," he pleaded. "I want to see again before I die." Adaugo reached out, her fingers glowing faintly in the starlight, and laid her hand on his face. The man staggered back, then opened his eyes and screamed, "Paigaro! I see the stars. I see her." The crowd erupted into cries of wonder, of worship, of fear. That night the village did not sleep, because they knew then that this was no ordinary return. Something ancient had come back with Adaugo. And it was only beginning. Kafir had once been a pillar of Umueke. Tall, proud, loud, the kind of man who walked with his chest first and his past buried behind him. But since Adaugo's disappearance and the rumors that followed, he had withered. His frame was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his once confident voice now trembled at the edges. He avoided the shrine. He avoided her name. When news reached him that Adaugo had returned, not as a tale whispered around fires, but as flesh walking among the living, he slammed his fist on the wall of his compound. "It is not possible," he barked at the sky. "I buried her myself. With my own hands." But even as he shouted, his heart betrayed him. A cold knot had been growing in his chest, curling into something hard and rotting. Fear now blossomed inside him like a tumor, slow and malignant. Not fear of the supernatural. Okafor had scoffed at spirits before, but fear of the past refusing to stay buried. His twin daughters Nkairu and Nwanaka, once lively laughing girls, had grown strange. Since Adaugo's return they no longer played. They walked in circles with their arms in the air, whispering to unseen things. And now each night their sleep became a chant. Adaugo. Adaugo. Okafor could no longer bear the weight of silence. He tied cowries around his neck, symbols of protection. He burned herbs crushed with trembling fingers, sending bitter smoke curling into his roof's rafters. But the shadows still moved. The air still whispered. On the 7th night he snapped. Under the pale eye of the moon he ran barefoot to the shrine, his wrapper askew, his voice raw from fear. He knelt before the sacred grove where wind chimes whispered in tongues older than men. "Leave me alone," he screamed into the dark. "I am sorry. I am sorry." His words echoed. And then the wind rose. It twisted the chimes into a chorus. The trees bowed. The earth seemed to breathe. And a voice, not a voice made of sound but of knowing, answered. "She is not vengeance. She is justice." Okafor collapsed in tears, but the night offered him no comfort. Suspicion ran through Umueke like wildfire wrapped in silk. Even miracles required proof. A gathering was called, under the great aji tree at the center of the village square. The elders arrived first in ceremonial wrappers and with carved staffs that told their lineage. Then came the women, heads tied in white, with baskets of kola nuts and bitter leaves. Children sat on rooftops, legs swinging. Drummers tapped uncertain rhythms, watching, waiting. Adaugo came barefoot. She wore white as always, but now it shimmered slightly as though the fabric remembered moonlight. She did not bow or hesitate. She sat cross-legged on the red earth, calm as still water. The eldest of the council, Papa Ubochi, raised a hand. "If you are truly Adaugo," he said, "tell us what only she would know." The silence thickened. Even the birds in the trees hushed. Adaugo looked around, her gaze gentle but piercing. Then her voice, clear and melodic, began to weave truth from memory. "My father's secret fishing spot," she said, "was behind the third bend in the river, near the place where the frogs sing louder than drums." Murmurs passed through the crowd. Heads nodded. "Mama Nkechi," she continued, turning to an old woman whose hands trembled, "you have a mole under your left foot. You told me when I was 7 that it was the mark of a river maiden." Mama Nkechi burst into tears, pulling off her wrapper to reveal the mole. "And under the old irako tree by the stream," Adaugo said, her eyes distant now, "I buried a clay doll named Nkem. I cried when her head broke." Papa Ubochi stood slowly. His staff fell from his hand. The elders rose. The people knelt. A gasp rippled through the village like the sweep of a spirit's wing. "She is Adaugo," someone whispered. "And she has returned," another echoed. Drums resumed. But now they beat for more than wonder. They beat for something ancient waking. For the first time in 12 long years, the drums of Umueke danced without sorrow. A festival was declared by the elders, endorsed by the gods. Omizi Nandu, the return of life. Preparations consumed the village. White cloths were tied to every tree and doorway. Calabashes filled with palm wine lined the roads. Children painted symbols on their foreheads, giggling as they copied the old ways. Elders brought out ancient instruments, cleaned and oiled for the first time in a decade. The square glowed with firelight and spirit. Hundreds of lamps were lit and placed on rooftops, windows, and tree branches, turning the village into a sea of stars. And in the center of it all sat Adaugo, not as a guest but as a queen returned from the underworld. She wore a crown of woven palm leaves, adorned with beads that clicked softly as she moved. Her presence calmed even the wildest children who sang her lullaby in unison, a song long forgotten by all but the oldest mouths. Old griots wept openly as they played the flutes and harps. Some said they heard the earth humming along. But not all hearts were light. In the shadows beyond the glow of the lamps, Okafor stood wrapped in darkness. He watched as villagers danced around Adaugo, offering her gifts, praises, prayers. Tears rolled down his cheeks, cutting paths through the dust on his face. But no one knew what stirred within him. Was it guilt, now full-grown and heavy with truth? Was it fear, coiled tight in the corners of his soul? Or was it something else, something like redemption, trying to break free? No one could say. Only the wind, still whispering justice. One particular night, the moon was a sliver of silver hanging low like a witness in the sky. Crickets sang softly, their rhythms trembling through the reeds that lined the great Umueke River. The water was still, dark as onyx, reflecting stars like scattered beads from a broken necklace. Adaugo stood by the riverbank, her feet bare against the damp earth. The hem of her white garment touched the water like a lover's hand. Her long braids swayed gently with the breeze, whispering secrets only the trees could understand. Behind her, quiet as a shadow but heavy with worry, came Mama Ogadi. The old priestess had watched many suns rise and fall. She had danced in trance, spoken with spirits, buried the bones of kings. But nothing, not even the old scrolls or the oracle's riddles, had prepared her for Adaugo. She approached slowly, her staff in hand, cowries clinking faintly with each step. The scent of herbs and ash followed her like a second skin. "You died," Mama Ogadi said softly, her voice both accusation and prayer. "We wept for you. We built the shrine. We poured libations. You were gone. Yet now here you stand breathing beneath the same stars. What are you truly, child?" Adaugo did not turn. She watched the river as though it too might speak. "I was buried, yes," she said. Her voice was like still water, calm but deep, with things living far beneath the surface. "But I was never dead." She bent slightly, her fingers grazing the surface of the river, causing ripples that glowed faintly under the moonlight. "The earth knew," she continued. "It felt my breath still moving beneath the soil. It cradled me, fed me with root and stone, showed me the veins beneath the land. I slept within her, not in death but in waiting." Mama Ogadi's eyes were wide, her knuckles white around her staff. "Wait, for what?" Adaugo looked up into the sky. Clouds moved across the stars like restless spirits. Her eyes shimmered gold for a heartbeat. For the right time. That night, thunder rolled across the hills like the drums of 1,000 ancestors. The villagers awoke one by one, drawn from their sleep by a pressure in the air, like the pause between a scream and a strike. Then it happened. A single bolt of lightning split the sky in two and struck the shrine of Adaugo. But it did not burn. The flames that erupted were not ordinary. They shimmered gold, not red. They flickered without smoke, dancing like spirits freed from bone. Instead of consuming, they revealed. Inside the flames a figure stood, graceful, shining. It was Adaugo. She stood untouched by the fire, her arms raised as though conducting the flames. Her eyes closed, lips moving in a chant no one could hear, yet every heart somehow understood. But just as panic and awe rippled through the village, someone screamed from across the square. "She's here. I just saw her in Ezechukwa's compound." People turned. And there she was, Adaugo seated quietly on her late father's old wooden stool, humming to a child with a fever. Her hands glowed faintly as they touched the child's chest. Two places. One night. One Adaugo and yet not. The next morning no one could speak without tremble. Elders called for fasts. Mothers tied red cloth around their children's wrists. Drummers refused to beat the skin of their instruments, afraid they might summon things they could not banish. Whispers began thin as smoke. She is no longer just a woman. She walks between two worlds. She's a bridge between what was and what will be. Even the birds seemed to sing her name with reverence. Adaugo no longer answered questions about her return. She no longer denied or affirmed. She simply was, and that alone made the earth beneath Umueke feel different. Some feared her. Others worshipped her. But all agreed. The world had tilted. And nothing would ever be the same again. The sun rose over Umueke not with its usual warmth, but with a kind of golden reverence, as if even the heavens had heard the tale. For days the earth had trembled with whispers, and the air felt like it remembered too much. Smoke from sacred fires curled like questions. Drums were silent, waiting for the right moment to speak again. In the heart of the village square, beneath the great idolatry where ancestors once gathered and judgments had been passed, the elders sat in a solemn circle. They were draped in their most sacred garments, threaded with silver from the riverbanks, dyed with the rarest roots, and their eyes bore the weight of centuries. Mama Ogadi stood in the center. She no longer held her staff. She no longer needed it. Her voice rose with the certainty of one who had seen the veil between worlds. "We must rename this land," she said, her tone neither asking nor commanding but simply knowing. For once, it was a place of buried truths, where evil walks in the daylight and dwells among men, the land of silent screams and wounds hidden beneath cassava leaves. But now, it has been cleansed. Not with fire, not with blood, but with the return of a child who became a mirror for our sins and still chose to love us. A murmur passed through the crowd like wind over dry maize. The name Umueke, children of the rat, had always borne the weight of an old curse, whispered to have come from an era of betrayal and cowardice. But now, with hearts bowed and heads lifted, the new name was called Umueke, children of goodness. The drums spoke then, slow and deep like the heartbeat of the land. Women raised ululations that cracked the sky. Men struck the ground with their staffs, sealing the name into the earth. Children danced without knowing why, only that their feet understood something their tongues could not speak. And at the center of it all stood Adaugo, not adorned in jewels or feathers. She wore the same white cloth she had first returned in. Simple, pure, glowing faintly in the sunlight as if dusted with the breath of the spirits. The people wanted to name her queen. Others said she should be high priestess, guardian of the shrine, voice of the gods. But Mama Ogadi, with a look both firm and tender, said, "She is not to be held in a title. She is beyond crown or altar. She is a symbol." A hush fell. Adaugo stepped forward, her feet silent on the red earth. She raised her hand, not high, not commanding, but open. "Let me not be remembered as miracle," she said, "but as reminder." She turned slowly, speaking to every corner of the square. A reminder that mercy can survive malice. That justice is not revenge but restoration. That the soil remembers kindness and protects what is pure. That even in the grave the innocent are not alone. Tears glistened like morning dew on weathered faces. She looked to the children, those born after her burial who had never known her name until it rang through their dreams. They reached out to her and she smiled. "Let no child suffer because of the evil of another. Let no light be buried again." And then, before the crowd could step closer, before hands could grasp her gown or voices cry for one more word, a wind rose from nowhere. Not harsh, not cold, but purposeful. Petals flew from the idolatry, caught in the wind, swirling around her in a golden storm. Her cloth lifted slightly. The air shimmered. And when the wind passed, she was gone. Not a step taken. Not a footstep left. Only the soft sound of cowries falling gently to the earth. where her footprints had once been. In the years that followed, no one forgot. The shrine became a place not of mourning but of promises. The village, now Umueke, flourished. Rain came when it should. No child went hungry. And whenever injustice tried to return, a soft breeze would stir the leaves and the elders would whisper, "Remember Adaugo, the girl who was buried, and rose like morning." And some say, when the river sings at night, she still walks beneath the stars. Thanks for watching till the end.